Walt Disney is almost a sacred figure in global pop culture. The creator of dreams, the wizard of cartoons, the architect of childhood for millions. But behind the flawless image, there are records that point to a dark and controversial side of his personality. Serious accusations of antisemitism and sympathies with questionable ideological groups. Several historians and researchers have revealed that Walt maintained close relationships, or at least frequent contacts, with individuals linked to the German-American Bund, an organization that, in the 1930s, openly supported Nazism in the United States. Furthermore, the German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, known for her Nazi propaganda films, had indirect connections with the cultural elite's social circle at the time, and Walt was mentioned in contexts that raised suspicions about his political leanings. But it doesn't stop there. Reports from former employees and personal letters indicate that Disney had a discourse filled with prejudice. Documents from that era, alongside testimonies, show that he cultivated an atmosphere that, even if not explicitly racist, was loaded with stereotypes and discrimination, especially against Jews. One of the most shocking examples comes from an anonymous testimony where an animator recalls Disney referring to certain groups with derogatory terms, stating that they are the real owners of the industry and we shouldn't let them control our films. This hostility was also reflected in some decisions within the company. Scripts were altered to avoid positive representations of minorities, and some Jewish employees were discriminated against or pressured to leave. Even Disney's carefully polished public speeches concealed opinions that many would consider intolerable today. Conspiracy theorists go even further. They claim that Walt Disney not only shared these views but also used his media empire to subliminally reinforce stereotypes, creating characters and stories that, on a closer look, carry biased messages against minorities and specific groups. While the world knows Mickey Mouse and the magic of theme parks, there is another narrative, darker and rarely discussed, that reveals a man immersed in prejudices that still echo in the shadows of his legacy. While Walt Disney was building his enchanted empire, there was a high and little-known price that many of his employees paid daily. Behind the cartoons that delighted the world, the studio's backstage was a minefield of tension, exhaustion, and authoritarian control. Accounts from animators of the time reveal exhausting workdays, often exceeding 12 hours, in conditions that today would be considered abusive. The pressure to deliver perfect products and meet nearly impossible deadlines created a suffocating environment. Disney, known for his obsessive perfectionism, spared no effort in imposing his vision, even if it meant crushing his team's creativity and well-being. This toxic work atmosphere exploded in 1941 when a historic strike brought the studio to a halt. Animators, artists, and technicians united to demand better conditions, fair wages, and respect. Walt's response, far from conciliatory, was harsh and authoritarian. He labeled the strikers as agitators, and even hired private detectives to spy on his employees. More than just strict, Disney cultivated a climate of fear where any deviation from his will was severely punished. Stories of sudden firings, public humiliations, and threats of blacklisting were common. Some animators reported that creativity was constantly stifled. Disney preferred total control over ideas that challenged his authority, even if those ideas were brilliant. Phrases like "here we make magic, not rebellion" echoed through the studio halls, revealing a controlling and even cruel side of the man behind the fairy tales. What seemed like a dream to millions was, for those inside, a nightmare of silent oppression where the creative spark was kept alive only by fear and submission. In the Cold War era, the fear of communism infiltrated every corner of America, including the halls of the Walt Disney Company. But what few know is that Walt Disney was not just a businessman concerned about his brand. He reportedly acted directly as an FBI informant, collaborating with J. Edgar Hoover in the hunt for so-called internal enemies. Secret documents and leaked testimonies indicate that Disney maintained close contact with FBI agents, providing information about employees suspected of communist or subversive ties. In a time marked by paranoia and censorship, the Disney studio became a surveillance ground, where colleagues were spied on and reported to ensure that nothing threatened the ideological purity of the empire. This stance was no coincidence. Walt saw communist ideology as a direct threat to his capitalist dream and absolute control over his company. He believed any dissenting thought needed to be eliminated, even if that meant destroying careers and lives. According to reports, Disney even demanded lists of suspects, pressuring the FBI to take action against artists and writers he considered dangerous. This collaboration intensified during Hollywood's infamous Red Scare, when thousands of professionals were persecuted, blacklisted, and expelled from the industry. Among the quotes attributed to Walt, one stands out for its dark tone. I have no room for communists in my magic kingdom. If anyone here is against the American dream, they're against me. This dark connection with the FBI reveals a controlling and paranoid side of the man who built fantasy empires, showing that the pursuit of a perfect world often involved authoritarian and repressive measures. What seemed to be just the creation of magic on screen actually hid a network of espionage and fear, where the Disney dream was kept alive through surveillance and betrayal. Walt Disney was not just an animation genius, he was also a creative tyrant. Known for his extreme perfectionism, Disney exercised absolute control over every detail of the film's characters, and even the personalities of his employees. This obsession with control created a suffocating environment where genuine creativity was often crushed in the name of perfect magic. Many animators describe Walt as a boss who didn't tolerate criticism or opposing opinions. He relentlessly reviewed scripts, drawings, and even the voices of characters, demanding total conformity to his vision, a rigid and inflexible vision. "This isn't art, it's control," said a former animator. Disney wanted everything exactly his way with no room for innovation. Quotes attributed to Walt illustrate his difficult temperament. "I didn't come here to make art, I came to make money. If you can't do it my way, you're in the wrong place. Magic only happens if you obey the rules." This rigidity caused a lot of internal tension. Talented artists left the studio frustrated, some abandoning promising careers because they refused to live under such an oppressive regime. Even moments of success were marked by an atmosphere of fear of making mistakes, fear of displeasing Walt. Disney's obsessive perfectionism didn't just limit creative expression, it also fueled a paranoid climate. He distrusted even his closest allies, maintaining a distance that made the environment even more toxic. The paranoia extended to secret meetings, constant reviews, and an almost military surveillance of the team's work and behavior. So while the public celebrated the magic and innovation of Disney films, behind the scenes a very different story was unfolding. The story of an authoritarian leader who turned creativity into an act of obedience. So far, we've explored the dark side of Walt Disney, his controversial actions, the toxic backstage environment, his collaboration with the FBI, and his obsessive control over his creations. But what if all of this was part of a much bigger plan? Conspiracy theorists claim that Walt Disney was not just a businessman or artist, but an architect of large-scale cultural manipulation. Through his films, characters, and theme parks, he supposedly created a powerful machine to influence generations, shape behaviors, and reinforce specific ideologies. According to these theories, Disney's magic was used to create an idealized universe, a parallel reality that hides subliminal messages and reinforces conservative, patriotic, and even racist values, all disguised under a veil of innocence and fantasy. Some researchers point to hidden symbols concealed in the animations and parks, messages that promote conformity, obedience, and rampant consumerism. Cinderella's castle, the catchy music, the iconic characters. All of it, according to this view, acts as a form of social control, a cultural soft power that keeps the audience hypnotized and docile. Moreover, the network of influence Walt created allegedly served to hide his connections with groups and governments of obscure interests, protecting a carefully constructed legacy designed to conceal the contradictions and darker aspects of the man. The magic that enchants millions may therefore be a facade, a smokescreen that hides not only prejudices and abuses but also a real ideological manipulation operation, where entertainment is just one piece of the puzzle. In the end, Walt Disney's legacy might be far more complex. A mix of creative genius, boundless ambition, and a shadowy web of power and control that still influences the modern world.